Well, a very good morning to everyone. This is a very, very special day for Scottish Church College. So on behalf of the college, I extend a very warm welcome to everyone who is present with us here today on the occasion of the annual lecture of the Scottish Church College Women and Gender Development Cell. This lecture is being organized by the cell along with the IQAC of the college in collaboration with the departments of History, Philosophy, and Political Science. It's a very special occasion because this is the first such annual lecture which is being organized by the cell. The cell was established back in 2022 in the month of April, and ever since it has tirelessly worked to organize such seminars, lectures, talks, students' presentations to sensitize us, the faculty, and you, the students, on issues of gender. So they have organized programs on a wide range of topics from women's health to the awareness of LGBTQ rights, to the right of men, and so on. It has also come up with its annual newsletter, which was published into 2023. It is thus, without a doubt, we can say that ever since its inception in 2022, the cell has only grown in strength under the guidance of our principal ma'am, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, and the able coordinatorship of Dr. Ishita Shur of the Department of Political Science. And a proof of that growing strength is, in fact, the presence of today's chief guest. Professor Nivedita Menon is one of the finest and most eminent feminist scholars that we have, who is active currently in our country. She's also a professor at the Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory, School of International Studies, JNU. For the cell to ensure her presence among us is indeed a great achievement. Professor Menon, it is with deep honor and pleasure that we welcome you to our city, to our college, and we are very happy that you have agreed to get some time out of your busy schedule and be with us and address this audience. Thank you, Professor Menon, for being with us. She would be speaking on new feminisms for the 21st century. And I believe all of us who have chosen to be here today, we are waiting to listen to her. So without wasting any more time, I would request our principal ma'am, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, our vice principal, Dr. Supratim Das, and the chief guest of honor, Professor Nivedita Menon, to kindly come up on stage. Standard definition of feminism states that it is the belief in full social, economic, and political equality for women, a belief that has precipitated into a global movement since the 20th century to put an end to sexism, sexist exploitation and oppression, and achieve full gender equality in law and in practice. Feminism has been instrumental in identifying the locations or the spaces where women face discrimination and has provided the means to fight them. And in the process, have also achieved some success, like with respect to right to vote, greater access to education, reproductive rights, and so on. And an overall acceptance of the issue of women's equality as a legitimate political and social goal. Does this mean that we are in a good place now? Does it suggest, as has been suggested by some, that we should be done with feminism, that it is now a cliche, a medium to bash the male gender, a movement that has run its course? I, as a working mother, bringing up an almost teenage daughter, and living in what may be considered a liberal joint family environment, however, would like to raise a few questions, only a few questions. Is the feeling of guilt that I feel every time when I fail to accommodate my daughter's needs due to professional commitments legitimate? Is it my failure that I cannot always balance my home and my work? Why do I feel an exceptional urge to teach my daughter how to protect her body rather than to be proud of it? Why do I feel sad and helpless when I realize that to my daughter of 12 years, it is normal that in our country, we have a ban on the determination of fetal sex by law, and she is, in fact, aware of the real reason? How do I explain to her that her rights are also human rights and not some separate special category of women's rights? How do I even begin to explain why this segregation is in the first place? How do I promise her a future where it should not matter that she is a woman, that she should be free from her assigned gender roles, that her gender identity should become irrelevant whether in the private or in the public sphere? And to think that my daughter belongs to an urban, educated, well-to-do Hindu family that can provide her with all the support she needs to fulfill her potentials. Well, then I can say this for a fact, that for us to even believe in the possibility of a future that promises true equality for all, and I mean all, the fight must go on. We should thus continue to communicate and create awareness through such seminars, and listen to scholars like Professor Menon, and reflect, realize, and change. So with hope in my heart, I would now like to begin with the inaugural session. I would like to request our principal ma'am, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Srimoi. Good morning and namaskar, shabaike. Professor Nivedita Menon from Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory, School of International Relations, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She is the keynote speaker of today's annual lecture on Feminisms for 21st Century, organized jointly by the Women and Gender Development Cell, Internal Quality Assurance Cell, and 3 departments, Political Science, History, and Philosophy of Scottish Church College. Our respected Vice Principal, Sir, Dr. Supratim Das, our Secretary, Dr. Shapan Kumar Mukuti, IQSC Coordinator, Dr. Shamrat Bhattacharjee, Bursar, Dr. Rajyasree Ghosh, Senator Secretary, Dr. Vidisha Sinha, Teachers Council Secretary, Dr. Indrani Kaur, respected faculty members from different colleges and universities, and of Scottish Church College also, and my beloved students who have come from in and around Kolkata from different universities and colleges. And I would really like to mention the names of the colleges because I am grateful to you that you have come to our college today. And it is a long list, so bear with me. And I think I have the total list with me. Victoria Institution, Bethune College, Chandidash Mahavidyalaya, Women's College, Kolkata, Jadavpur University, Loreto College, Vivekananda Mission Mahavidyalaya, Heritage Law College, Sharoda Mission College, Mohitosh Nundi Mahavidyalaya, Gurudas College, Vijay Krishna Girls College, Ram Mohan College, Rabindra Bharati University, AJC Bose College, Rai Dighi College, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, West Bengal State University, Hiralal Majumdar Memorial College, Raghunathpur College, Herombo Chandra College, Bagnan College, Presidency University, Calcutta University, Shibpur Dinabandhu Institution, Maharaja Srish Chandra College, Raniganj University, Diamond Harbour Women's University, Dinabandhu Andrews College, CMR University, Bangalore, Women's Christian College, Calcutta Girls College, Kharagpur College, Bhavanipur Educational Institute Society, Muralidhar Girls College, Savitri Girls College, Sagar Datto Medical College, Bangobashi Morning, THK Jain College, Prabhu Jagatbandhu College, Shet Surajmal College, Vidyasagar College, Jamia Millia Islamia. So, if I have missed, I don't know, please excuse me. So the students and the faculty members from different colleges, on behalf of Scottish Church College family, I welcome you all this morning. Thank you. We are grateful to Professor Menon that she has accepted our invitation and is amongst us today in spite of her busy schedule. We are overwhelmed to have you in our college, madam. I know that audience is waiting eagerly to listen to you. In this regard, I want to mention one name for whom our dream has been fulfilled. She is none other than Dr. Ishita Shur, coordinator, thank you, coordinator of our Women and Gender Development Cell. She deserves already, she got the round of applause. And also our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shamrat Bhattacharjee, who comes forward to support this sort of program spontaneously to maintain the quality of the old heritage grade 1 institution always. Madam, you are a great inspiration for all of us, and the participation of faculty members and students from around 45 institutions establishes the fact. I wish all the best to the organizers and pray to God for His blessings on us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It is because you are always there behind us that we are always able to succeed in our endeavors. Now, I would like to request our Vice Principal, Dr. Supratim Das, as he always does every time so beautifully, introduce the seminar to our audience.
Thank you, Srimoyi, and a very good morning. The whole audience, including me, are eagerly waiting to hear our speaker today, Professor Nivedita Menon. So I will not take much time, but just I would like to say a few words as a non-expert on particularly choosing South Asia. Now, Professor Nivedita Menon, in her 2012 publication, the name of the book, I think many of us here know, Seeing Like a Feminist, writes, I'm quoting, "When we in the non-West theorize on the basis of our experiences, we rarely assume that these are generalizable everywhere. But we do believe that comparisons and engagements with other feminisms are not only possible, but unavoidable. Which is why, in this book, I often assume and address the lively global feminist voices that surround us, unquote. Now, it is notable that scholarship by third world feminists, they have coined phrases such as feminism without borders, transnational feminism, relational and multicultural feminism, and international feminism to capture the ferment of new approaches to feminisms globally. During the last 50 years, South Asia has been the location and the focus of dynamic, important feminist scholarship and, of course, activism, examining recent feminist interventions in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Feminist scholars and activists have addressed responses to religious fundamentalism and secularism, globalization, labor and migration, militarization and state repression, public representations of sexuality, and the politics of sex work. These issues attest to the diversity and specificity of South Asian locations and feminist concerns, and also demonstrate how feminist engagements in the region can enrich and advance feminist theorizing globally. Now, to my mind, South Asian feminisms, they are facing some of the major challenging questions that also I think different societies are facing today. These are the questions of our time, some of the questions. One, what is the work of feminism in an age of accelerating state-sponsored violence? Two, how do women resist the depredations of national and global security regimes? Three, how has the combination of rights, claims, and international development machinery compromised feminist practice? Four, when, where, and under what conditions has the rule of law failed women and consolidated new forms of gendered injustice? And the last but not the least, what indeed is the geopolitical remit of South Asian feminisms, whether theoretical or practical? Just one more comment. There is an argument that forms of multiculturalism and internationalism within global feminist formulations use a binary, sponge additive strategy. It has also been pointed out that Eurocentric versions of global feminism imagine an evolution toward a reduction of identity practices that will copy Eurocentric notions of culture under the sign of global feminism. So diversity and multiculturalism can often strengthen instead of challenge Euro-American norms of gender, sexuality, and women's identities. So this was my humble submission as a non-expert, and I once again congratulate Professor Menon for taking the trouble to come here, and definitely she is more interested to have an interaction with you, the audience, the students, and others, and I think it is going to be a very fascinating session today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting the tone for this session. Before we hand over the mic to Professor Menon, there is a very small formality of welcoming our guest. I will request Professor Varvi Roy from the Department of Philosophy to assist our principal ma'am to kindly felicitate our guest. Professor Prodipto Roy from the Department of Political Science will assist our Vice Principal Dr. Das to do the same. Thank you. I will now request Dr. Ishita Shur, Department of Political Science, and the coordinator of the Women and Gender Development Cell to kindly introduce the speaker and lead us into the lecture. Ishita.
Thank you. I think we deserve this, and I'm very thankful to all of you for two things. One, for joining us, and second, for showing interest in our thoughts and initiatives. I think I have taken 1 year to mature this entire story. I communicated Professor Menon last year, April. It's true, ma'am? And it's 2024 April. So it's 1 year, finally, the wait is over. Before I introduce Professor Menon, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce the Women and Gender Development Cell, because it's not easy to get this kind of audience every day. But I assure you I'll not take much time. Women and Gender Development Cell actually emerged in 2022 April with an initiative to start dialogue on unspoken issues. This cell, in collaboration with the IQAC, the Departments of Political Science, History and Philosophy, in the last 2 years has basically organized 8 programs, and mainly on women and gender, including student seminars. On International Women's Day, we provide a platform to our students, not only from Scottish Church College, but also from other colleges, to present their views, to nurture their ideas on women's issues. In December 2023, we have already published our first newsletter, Breaking the Silence. If you are interested, searching Google, please check it on website. It's very much there. Breaking the Silence, the first newsletter of the cell. We have so far many eminent personalities who have delivered lectures for the cell, for the enhancement of the cell. We started with Dr. Malini Bhattacharya, the former professor and director of Women's Studies, Jadavpur. Dr. Purabi Roy, the former professor, historian from the Department of IR, Jadavpur. Dr. Nandita Dhawan, Women's Studies, Jadavpur. Dr. Jhumpa Mukherjee, St. Xavier's College, Political Science Department. Dr. Ruchira Goswami from NUJS, and our very own Dr. Shushmita Gonsalves from the Department of Political Science. These eminent personalities have spoken over various issues, starting from women's rights to sexual harassment and LGBTQ issues. Most importantly, we have also invited the founder members of the SAFO for Equality Kolkata, transgender activists, and also men's rights activists. And they have also enriched us with their journey and with their experiences. So this is the journey of the Women and Gender Development Cell so far in the last 2 years. Now our next speaker, Dr. Nivedita Menon, Professor Menon, is the first speaker or the next speaker for our first annual lecture of the cell. So the cell is now introducing its first annual lecture, and we have a plan to continue with this 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. So now it is my immense pleasure to introduce Professor Menon. But I personally feel we don't need to do that, because the huge response for the seminar or for the lecture has already proven that she does not need any introduction. But we have to do our duty. So Professor Menon teaches comparative politics and political theory in JNU. She has edited many books and authored many books. Already our Vice Principal Sir has introduced her work. But to name a few, I would mention Gender and Politics in India 2001. I would also mention Recovering Subversion 2007, Seeing Like a Feminist 2012, now it's out with a recent edition, and the very recent one, Secularism as Misdirection 2024 from Duke University. Professor Menon is a very regular writer in the EPW and all national and international leading newspapers and magazines. But it is not enough, I feel, because I have got the immense honor to meet her, and and our authority has invited her in this institution. So I must tell you that many of us present in this hall actually have grown up by studying her books and ideas. So we all are very grateful to her. She is not only known for her endless commitment for women's rights activism and human freedom, but she is also known for her very strong voice on minority rights, and also very, very strong voice on the meaning of contemporary nationalism, citizenship rights, and identity politics. Lastly, what I feel for her, she is one of those who still in this country has the courage to challenge, to critique, and to criticize. Ma'am, we are extremely grateful to you for inviting our for accepting our invitation and just enrich us today with your all inspiration, motivation, and ideas. Thank you. It's all yours now.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I too noticed when I was sitting here that most people couldn't be seen behind the podium. So I'm honestly deeply, deeply touched, honored by this invitation to Scottish Church College. I'm grateful to the principal, to the vice principal, secretary of Scottish Church College, above all to Ishita, who has indeed been discussing this possibility with me for over a year. It's a deep honor for me to walk the corridors of this college and to know that Subhash Chandra Bose studied here, Vivekananda studied here. I went into the library. I'm still recovering from the shock of seeing their names on documents of 1919 and 1939 and so on. It's a great, great honor. These are some of our legacies which we have to protect and prevent from being appropriated. As you know, everything is appropriated today. Even our Azadi slogan is appropriated. Even Hum Dekhenge is appropriated. So we have to, as we know, it's a huge battle. So I will mostly read my lecture in order not to waste time. Actually, Dr. Das, as a so-called non-expert, laid out the most extensive and complex agenda for questions for feminism for the 21st century. Had I received that in advance, I would have prepared a very different lecture. Honestly, the issues that he raised are extremely pertinent and complicated, but I will barely touch the surface of those questions. I decided to focus on a few issues. Obviously, feminisms for the 21st century, we could spend all day talking about. You know, as we all know, this is an unprecedented time for our country. There is a complete subversion of the Constitution, the selling of India's public assets to private capital, the privatizing of higher education, and the dumbing down of higher education, because obviously the attempt is to stop critical thinking and to produce labor for global capital. So the dumbing down of education, the ending of the MPhil program, the very quick PhD over 4 years, the topics for research that are handed down by the government, you would have seen Gujarat has already handed down, and the topics for so-called research are basically to write about government programs and to celebrate them. So there's the privatizing and dumbing down of higher education, innumerable physical attacks against Dalits and religious minorities, especially Muslims. I'm reading these out only to begin with because one has to bear witness. As Amir Ali said, sab yaad rakha jayega, sab yaad rakha jayega. Whether it is in 24 or whether it is 10 years from now, yaad to rakha jayega. Hisab aapka generation lenge. So So I feel I want to begin with like a roll call, you know, of the kind of issues that we have been facing over the last 10 years. So there are innumerable physical attacks against Dalits and religious minorities, especially Muslims, the policing of women, the use of labels like love jihad to basically control women's sexuality and mobility, to name just some of the kinds of violence we face today. Even the pandemic and the lockdown, as we know, were weaponized in order to push through the dual agenda of this regime of establishing a violent authoritarian Hindu Rashtra and promoting crony capitalism. It's a dual agenda, it's very clear now. But that is not the point of this discussion today. Today I would like us to dream of other worlds, something hopeful for the future. What can we work towards? What kind of resources do we already have? What can we build? What are our dreams and visions for our children? I hope to arrive at some of these ideas from the perspective of a queer leftist feminist whose understanding is deeply informed by Ambedkarite thinking and politics. There are, of course, many, many, many things we can talk about, but for the purposes of this lecture, I will pick up about maybe 4 issues and talk about how we could be reimagining them, not only from the point of view of what the state and government can do, but also from the point of view of our own self-transformations. Because if there's something that we have learned over the last 2 decades, which is the lifetime of many of you in this room, it is that transformation comes from the ground. It comes from movements. It comes from pressure of social movements pushing the state. It does not come as a grant from the state and government and the law. So what kinds of self-transformations, and I don't mean individual selves, I'll come back to this question, what are the ways in which we as movements, as collectivities, also as individuals who are part of movements and collectivities, how can we transform society? So the first point that I want to take up is actually what Srimoyee spoke about in her introductory remarks. Really, she expressed it as a personal dilemma, but the question of the sexual division of labor is still an issue for the 21st century. It's still very much an issue today, just as much as it was when I was coming into feminism in the 80s. How do feminists look at the sexual division of labor? How does it globally undergird not only patriarchy, but also class and caste inequalities? What do we mean by the sexual division of labor? It is the division of work. It's a conceptual division of work into private and public. It is the conceptual understanding that the work of production and the work of reproduction should be sexually divided. I'm stressing conceptually because in actual practice, the public and the private domains are both domains in which women are participating, but the mythology is that women's responsibilities are limited to the private domain and men's to the public domain. I'll be explaining this more as we go along. Now, when we talk about reproduction, production is generally understood to be what it is, the production of value in the public domain. But the work of reproduction, as feminists have pointed out, involves not just pregnancy and giving birth to new labor power or new laboring bodies. It includes the reproduction of labor power, by which the strength of labor is replenished to go back to work every day, to provide capital with labor every day. This is housework, the cooking, the cleaning, the looking after children. Reproduction is assumed to be in the so-called private domain, and production is supposed to be in the public domain. But we all know that most women actually function in both domains, and what we are thinking of as the private domain is actually very public. Because this unwaged labor, housework, is what lies at the basis of profits for employers, as they are not paying for a large part of what the worker needs. Either this labor is performed for free in their own homes by women, or they perform this work for a pittance in other people's homes as domestic servants, or as well as in their own homes. So there was a movement called Wages for Housework in the 1970s in UK mainly, And that movement lay on the understanding that what if housework was paid for, it would bring capitalist society to a crisis, because everybody's wages would have to rise to meet that the wages that are being paid, and it would bring capitalist society to a crisis. There was a huge, very interesting debate. You will find it in New Left Review, domestic labor debate. Ultimately, that particular wages for housework demand or movement died down because of the understanding that if you demand wages for housework, you are naturalizing and concretizing the sexual division of labor, right? You're assuming that one bodies marked gender A will do that work, bodies marked gender B will not do that work. But it also makes, who pays, right? Does the employer pay the husband? And then the husband pays the wife. That makes the wife the employee of the husband, introducing a new dimension of hierarchy and gender power. So the wages for housework movement was a very movement, and the debates, very rich economic debates, is very interesting from the point of view of how this issue was looked at in the 70s. But ultimately, how wages for housework is not the way to go. We really need to be thinking of an end to the sexual division of labor, not concretizing it through demands like wages for housework. Now, those who perform domestic work as those who perform it as wage laborers, some people are paid, mostly women, are paid for domestic work, but that is what they do in other people's homes. They're not only poor, but they're also from the non-Savarna castes. They could be Dalits or OBCs, but even if they are not, there is a definite caste division in the performance of this labor. The implicit caste dimensions and the assumptions of untouchability that cling to domestic labor are evident in the way we call them servants. And they're called servants' quarters. Many of middle-class people live in homes with places called servants' quarters. They're treated as servants in middle-class homes. We can call them domestic help. It makes us feel better. But they're treated as servants. They don't sit on chairs, they sit on the floor, they don't eat from the same vessels as the family they work for, and they're often not even permitted to use lifts and toilets in the home. So there is an implicit caste construction in the way domestic wage labor is positioned in the frameworks of pollution and purity, touchability and untouchability. Often you will see a very interesting slide from untouchability concerns which are seen as backward, and in 21st century India there's no caste. As you all know, in Bengal there's no caste, right? This is the standard. Oh, Bengal, we don't have caste. It's often said in Bangla. I can't say it in Bangla. So there's a slide from caste and untouchability to hygiene. We don't want them to use the plates and glasses we use because they do such dirty work. They're doing your dirty work. They do such dirty work. They live in such dirty environments. So that's a very interesting slide from what you can see as I don't agree with the modernity tradition kind of binary, because we all know tradition is constituted every single day. Tradition is as modern as modernity. But still, there's an understanding that this is regressive feudal practice, but hygiene is a modern concern. So there's an implicit caste construction in the way domestic wage labor is positioned in the frameworks of pollution and purity, touchability and untouchability. This is what sexual division of labor produces, in a sense. So what is our alternative vision? What is the way in which we can rethink this? To begin with, we need to recognize that sexual division of labor is as much of a compulsorily and violently enforced institution as caste is. It is not optional or voluntarily chosen. Women who refuse to perform this labor are controlled very strictly by families and society and are often physically coerced into adhering to the norms. This compulsory institution, there are many one is the compulsory institution of heterosexual marriage, but there is the compulsory institution of heterosexuality, and there is a compulsory institution of the sexual division of labor. This compulsory institution ensures that all women are affected in their public roles to some extent or the other by the sexual division of labor. It affected in their public roles. It affects the way they see their ambitions and futures from the time they are 13. Young girls learn that they have to think of their ambitions in terms of what can I do while performing my role as a wife and mother. So you ask a group of 16-year-old boys, assuming some kind of class capital, right? Obviously, if you speak to very poor people, and the majority of this country, men are, young boys are equally limited, but within that class, women will be more limited. What is your ambition? It will be determined by whatever my husband is doing, what is his work, will I be posted with him everywhere, let me get some basic qualifications that will enable me to do some part-time work everywhere. The ambition, so it's not just how you perform in the public, this is a violation. The sexual division of labor is a violation of citizenship rights promised to us by the preamble to the Indian Constitution. It's a constitutional violation. Because the enforcement of the sexual division of labor, it is an enforced and violent institution, means that as citizens, you're not able, so it's as much of a limitation and a violation as caste discrimination, discrimination on the grounds of community, discrimination on the grounds of class. So what is our alternative, and what is the way we can rethink this? So once we recognize it as a violent and compulsory institution, we have already reached one stage, because then you realize it needs to be dismantled. We can work toward dismantling it. And many of the dreams that, as I'm talking about, I have for the future, also it moves from us outwards. So we can start, of course, with our own lives. One way of doing this is by committing to pay a fair living wage to those who perform this labor at our homes, so that they don't have to do this backbreaking work in 4 separate houses just to keep themselves from starving. If we could commit that the salary we pay them will enable them to maybe work in just 1 or maximum 2 homes, if we commit to that as a society, that will make a small difference. It's a small difference, and it's a very reformist idea. It's not a radical restructuring, but reformism starts somewhere. If there is one thing that the Indian middle class understood during the lockdown, then it is the excruciating nature of household work with which the domestic workers perform for them. So we have to commit to pay a living wage. We need to, in a kind of broader way, as a movement, work towards social responsibility and state responsibility and employers' responsibility for domestic labor and childcare facilities at all workplaces. This has to be a commitment that has to be on the manifesto of every political party. State resources should be poured into childcare facilities at all work sites, not just government work sites, not just where women work. We often use the term human resources for people, although I don't like to use the term, but this term is used by the state, and if humans are resources, then the state and society also have a responsibility for ensuring that these facilities are available at all workplaces. Such a compulsion, if there were a law, for example, it will generate a kind of ripple effect of employment. There will be women, and perhaps men, depending on the comfort level of parents, employed at childcare facilities. When I say men depending on the comfort level of parents, I'm talking about the possibilities of abuse, sexual abuse, which I will come to later. And it is largely the case that sexual abusers are men, but of course we are also concerned about sexual abuse by women. But the immediate response for various good and bad reasons of parents to men looking after their children will be partly because of gender role stereotypes, but partly because they fear their children will be abused. So even men could do the work depending on the comfort level of parents, and they would be employed at childcare facilities, paid by the employer, paid by the state. It's important to see that the children of those women who are running, or men who are running the childcare facilities or doing the work in childcare facilities, should also have a place in those very same childcare facilities. That is, there should be no, these poor people will look after my children, but their children will be playing on the street. It has to be a commitment we make as a society. This means we should be talking about a world in which domestic labor is taken as something that is foundational to the building of society, and it cannot be divided solely by class and certainly not by gender alone. So that's the first issue. And it sounds, I mean, even as I was preparing, I was thinking, is this now too basic, right? I'm coming to address a university gathering. Is it too basic? Unfortunately, in April 2024, it is still not so basic that we need not talk about it. It's what Srimohi began with, because this is what every woman in the room imagines or thinks her life will be in the future or is currently as we're going on. And it brings up, and if we take up sexual division of labor as a violent and compulsorily enforced institution, we are actually talking about caste and class as well. The second issue that I will address is that of sexual violence and sexual harassment, and how do we engage with these in a world which we would like to look different from the one we currently live in. Here we would press for several things. I think a key demand, again, that can be forced to be on the agenda of political parties, we should press for the need for state-run public transport, which should be ideally free, but at least cheap. It should be publicly funded and cover all parts of a city or town and be available for 24 hours so that it is possible for more people to be on the roads at all times. One of the things that feminists have been arguing for a very long time is that sexual harassment in public places is reduced when more women are on the roads. Increased accessibility of public transport obviously has some positive implications for pollution and climate change and so on. But overall, it is a good move in more than one direction, and reducing private transport usage has implications for pollution as well. It is our responsibility to address sexual harassment and violence in every space that we are in. Each of us is responsible for making sure that the environment is not one of sexual harassment or violence in our homes, in streets, in institutions where we work. This can be done at an everyday level by refusing to participate in sexism, sexist jokes, sexist comments. It requires men to stand up and not take this from other men. It requires women to stand up and not take this from other women. It requires all of us to socially boycott someone we know to have sexually harassed a friend of ours, even if procedurally it is not possible to act against them. It requires us to take a stand. We will not take sexual harassment or sexual violence against anybody, and we have to create such an atmosphere that the normalizing of sexual harassment stops, the jokes, the humor, those kinds of things. That's at an everyday level, because I feel that politics, as I said earlier too, it's not only at the level of legal transformation and so on, it is at the level of how we produce a change in our everyday lives. But of course, we do need to also introduce procedures and ways of dealing with such acts as and when these happen before us. The law is not always the answer. The existing law, the 2013 law, has several problems, and the ICCs that have been set up under these laws have several problems. They're all nominated, they're controlled by the employer. Prior to this, under the Vishakha judgment, there were different kinds of committees called different things, POSH, GS Cash. There were several kinds of committees all over universities, which were much more flexible to the requirements of university spaces, and they involved democratic elements, they included elected elements. Delhi University, Delhi University, JNU, all had these. The Justice Verma Committee recommendations were in fact much more reflective of the kinds of inputs. So this preceded the 2013 Act, the Justice Verma Committee. They were much more reflective of the kinds of inputs that different social movements, particularly the feminist groups, contributed. A one-size-fits-all kind of law cannot take care of sexual harassment in spaces and institutions as varied as a university, a factory, an office, and so on. The only way in which we can deal with sexual violence is by making sure that there are multiple regulations in multiple institutions to suit specific work conditions. This has to be produced democratically. If you look at the GS Cash in JNU or the sexual harassment policy in Delhi University, thousands of students and teachers and non-teaching, non-academic staff were involved in developing those. That is how it has to be. It has to be from the bottom up. We need to work towards a system that would support the complainant without impunity and ensure accountability. What we do not need is stronger and stronger punishments. We do not need death sentences. We do not need longer imprisonment spells. It has been well established that stricter punishments do not lead to reduction of crime. It does not act as a deterrent. In fact, feminist legal theorists have found that the stronger the punishment, the less likely in court accused is likely to be convicted, because the judges feel if what we are going to punish this person with is a lifetime in jail or a death punishment, then I want to be 100% convinced that he is guilty. And that we have to understand that sexual harassment and violence is not a crime like other crimes. There are often no witnesses. The issue has to be established in circumstantial ways often. And so greater punishment is not the issue. What is the issue? The certainty of punishment, the end of impunity. Someone who was found guilty of sexual harassment in Delhi University through proper procedures by the a professor of Delhi University, found guilty of sexual harassment by all the procedures of the university, was then rewarded. He was given, according to these understandings, he was given a very, it was a punishment which said he would be blocked from certain kinds of appointments for a few years. There was it was a punishment that fitted the crime. Soon after that, he was under this regime, he was appointed on the Executive Council of JNU, and he went on to become the Vice Chancellor of Vishwabharati. When he became the Vice Chancellor of Vishwabharati, I need not take his name. It is almost as famous as Subhash Chandra Bose, for very, very different reasons. But when he was made Vice Chancellor, this history was behind him. It was known to all. And it's only when his behavior in the university showed his true colors that people started coming to us to say, what were you saying about sexual harassment? So that's how lightly sexual harassment is taken. It takes the man to throw stones at students for you to understand what he is. We knew what he was 20 years ago because he was a sexual harasser. But that's not something anybody takes seriously. You throw stones at someone, that's taken. You know that he threw stones at us. He has many firsts to his credit. So what we need is certainty of punishment, quickness of punishment if someone is found guilty. It does not matter whether the case is at the level of an internal sexual harassment committee or at the level of courts. It cannot drag on for 7 years, 8 years, 15 years. Bhavri Devi still hasn't got justice, decades down the line. I don't know, many of you are very young, but perhaps if you're all students of Indian politics, you know that Bhavri Devi is a Dalit woman who was gang raped in 1992 by upper caste men in whose family she had prevented a child marriage in her capacity as employee of a government program. So in 1995, the District and Sessions Court in Jaipur dismissed the case and acquitted all the 5 accused on the grounds that it was impossible that upper caste men would even touch a Dalit woman, let alone rape her. And the case was then appealed in the Rajasthan High Court, where it has languished without progress since then. But Bhavri Devi has not languished. She's brave, she's powerful. I name her because we are proud to name her. Usually we don't name survivors of rape, but she is an icon for the feminist movement. And it is her case that resulted in the Vishakha guidelines for the Supreme Court on sexual harassment at the workplace. So we need to ensure a legal system in which there is immediate dealing with the situation, certainty of punishment, and timely execution of the same. We do need to think differently about sexual violence in the context of, let's say, rape of Dalit women or Muslim women in situations of communal violence and caste violence. And here, of course, the state has to intervene and take prompt action against the perpetrators. The local police, who are often found to be closely involved with and act in the interests of the perpetrators in such cases, as we saw in Hathras. Again, in Hathras, that was very recent. You will remember in 2020, a Dalit woman was gang raped and she died. Journalists who went to cover that rape, one of them is still in jail, just for going to cover the rape. So we have to remember that that rapes of Dalit women are one more way of reinforcing the caste order and the violence of caste. It is not the rape of one woman alone. It is a way of reinforcing the violence of caste. It is about re-establishing the caste order. It's part of the strategy and the tactic of controlling and maintaining caste hierarchy. So we have to, at our level, work towards both institutional changes as well as changes on the ground, such that we create a society in which sexual violence is made recognizable, prevented as far as possible, and punished promptly when it does take place. Women should not have to offer reasons for being in public spaces at all times. Women should not have to offer reasons for just loitering. This is an interesting word and a book that Shilpa Phadke and her colleagues came up with. Why Loiter is the name of the book. If you haven't read it, please do read it. So this is to hang around without purpose. Can any woman hang around without purpose in a public place? Just hang around. There's a reason why we are going from point A to point B. We can't just hang around on Park Street, say, on a street corner, doing adda. Just, what are you doing if you're just? That's the answer. We're just. So this is a way of reclaiming the public space, and something very interesting happened after this book was written. A lot of young women started taking pictures of themselves loitering and put it up on, I think, Insta. Now there are very clear boundaries to this kind of loitering. There are very definite class limitations. I don't need to repeat that. Everything is determined by that. But even women who bear class privilege are not able to come out of policing. Working class women in working class localities actually face a fair degree of direct violence. In upper class homes, it is done in a more civilized, quote unquote, civilized way. Some upper class women manage to escape these constraints, but we do need to think about public spaces. How can we make them joyous, heterogeneous, and accessible not only in terms of gender but in terms of disability and the marginalized of many kinds, caste, class, etc. It is an alternative dream, a vision where we want to counter and contest and transform societies which are driven by sexual violence. In this new world, we aspire to create systems in which those who face sexual violence are taken seriously and are supported. For example, sexual violence directed at a trans woman must be taken as seriously as sexual violence against any other gender. Sexual violence against men must be taken seriously as against any other gender. We are thinking in terms, or what we need to think about is in terms of building joyous, heterogeneous public spaces. If you ask me what is the one value that can challenge patriarchy, caste, Hindu Rashtra, it is heterogeneity. And what happens with heterogeneity is that we are, if we protect and value heterogeneity, we are opening ourselves up to continuous self-questioning, because we don't know what are the heterogeneous voices that will emerge. In the 80s, when I was a feminist, I did not think in terms of anything other than two genders. And we don't know 5 years from now what we will be seeing in terms of multiple kinds of demands for justice and transformations. We don't know. Heterogeneity is a horizon. We don't reach it. It keeps receding. So we don't reach a point where there's a revolution and we've achieved it. No, it is something that opens ourselves up to continuous self-criticism and hopefully movement of different sorts. So joyous public spaces where people who have different kinds, who experience different kinds of marginalities can freely enter. That's one kind of thing. The other kind, and that we can do at our level. But of course we need to work towards transforming the law as well, because the law won't leave us alone, as well as institutional procedures, so that there's certainty of punishment and the surety of a short yet quick process by which the case is examined. Lastly, we are thinking about a way in which conversations on sexual violence and harassment shift in such a way that what is rendered normal, the objectification of human bodies, becomes unacceptable. The third issue that I will talk about has to do with sexuality and the family. So how do we think about gender justice in the household, and what does it mean to live in a world in which we value and support all kinds of intimate relationships, not just the heterosexual, nuclear, couple or marriage system, all forms of ways in which human beings want to live in intimacy with one another and support one another. All of these need to be valued, supported, have legal recognition wherever necessary, and wherever people voluntarily seek such recognition. The Uttarakhand Civil Code is an example which has now been passed this March it has been assented to by the President. It is the law now. If anybody here in this room is from Uttarakhand, it applies to you. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be living in Uttarakhand. If you are an Uttarakhand, with a person with an Uttarakhand domicile, you are covered by this law. And what does this law do? It says that, among many other things, it says that if you're in a relationship that is not marriage, you have to seek prior permission. Anyone can report you. So that means any number of spies can report you. You have to go to the police. You have to register yourself. The police will inform your parents. They will look at whether you can be permitted to live together. If you live together without this permission, you can be jailed. Be under no illusions. This is what this government will bring in. Uttarakhand has already passed this legislation. We all thought that the Uniform Civil Code will affect only Muslims. Oh, it will only affect. They'll stop bad things like polygamy. Not we all, but that's the general understanding, right? They'll only stop polygamy and triple talaq. No, they want to control and police sexuality. The Uttarakhand Civil Code is the blueprint for what India will look like if these people come back to power this year. Just don't be under any illusions about what is happening. So what we are saying is that, what we would like to say is that wherever legal recognition is sought or it is required, then that should be available, but not if you don't seek it. After all, if you decide not to marry and to live with someone, you're making a conscious choice. I don't want to be recognized by the state. But the state is saying you don't have that option. We will recognize you, we will drag you into it, and we will not permit you to stay together if you're of different caste, whatever it is that they decide. All forms of family, all kinds of gender identities, all kinds of sexual orientation and sexual desires, all of these must have space. The institution of compulsory heterosexual marriage framework must be questioned. We must recognize and accept multiple ways in which people can live in intimacy and solidarity and in love with one another, or as in many numbers as they need. It could be people living alone, it could be people living in communities, it could be people living in couples, it could be people living in groups of whatever. But the point is, human beings have multiple ways of entering into intimacy and loving one another. And the overarching and very violent institution of compulsory marriage is something we definitely need to challenge. This is actually interesting because because marriage, let's face it, more than heterosexuality, marriage is compulsory in this society. It is compulsory marriage for men and women. From the time you're in your 20s, it starts, the pressure to get married. And we all assume we must. Many of us do as young people, because we think that's the only thing to do. Marriage can always be reconstituted. And of course, there are people who will continue to want to enter into marriage. And in that case, if there is such a thing as a legal institution of marriage, then that has to be based on a mutual contract between adults, not between families, as is the case now. And it must, if it's there, and if it offers certain advantages, it must be available to all who seek it, not just heterosexual people. So as you know, queer marriage has been denied so far by the Supreme Court. If there is there can be multiple ways. People can live in marriage, people can live outside marriage. There should be ways in which we accept these kinds of pluralities. The word contract is often used to make something sound unemotional and devoid of value. But I think we can see contract as something that indicates that marriage is a legal institution. It's a legal relationship. It has property implications. It has income implications. It has implications for those who will have custody of the children if the marriage breaks up. And we should just be able to say this without weeping about it, that the marriage might break up. Because of course, I do believe that we will have to recognize that more and more it will not be one marriage in a lifetime. It will not be one relationship in a lifetime. Not for everyone, but for many people. That can happen. And therefore, we have to be prepared for it. So a marriage contract has to have a gender-just way of deciding things like custody and property and so on. This is not to underplay the enormous pain involved in simply making yourself vulnerable to another human being. Whether the relationship lasts or it doesn't last, loving is a tough job. It is very difficult to love and to be loved. And we can recognize that, but we also have to try and ensure that there are no structural constraints, so that on top of the pain of the relationship, you have to deal with, will I be on the streets? So the contract should recognize what the economic share of each partner is, recognize the value that reproductive labor has. It should have clarity on how the marriage contract can be ended, what are the equitable ways in which the common property can be shared, how are children to be treated. So another interesting implication arising from thinking about what an equitable marriage contract could look like is the uniform civil code debate. Because when uniformity is stressed as something that is good for everybody, we need to recognize that uniformity is not justice. Uniformity does not mean equality. Uniformity only means that everybody has to be the same. Same as who? What will be the norm on the basis of which everybody has to be the same? If that question is asked, you will find that those norms are the dominant norms, the powerful community norms, the most patriarchal, the most casteist. These are the norms that will be rendered uniform across the board. I present to you the Uttarakhand Civil Code. Now we no longer even have to speculate what the uniformity will be. We know what the uniformity will be. The most dominant casteist, classist norm. There are heterogeneous kinds of, so legal pluralism is not a bad thing. Globally, this has been recognized. Legal pluralism is very important. There are heterogeneous kinds of gender injustice, and therefore there should be multiple ways of engaging with these legally. We don't need uniformity, we need gender justice. We need legal and social codes that ensure not just gender justice, but also challenge the caste and class inequality that undergirds the present system. So that's I think the third issue I discussed. The fourth issue I will discuss is citizenship. Why is citizenship a feminist issue? First, because citizenship is often weaponized to deprive people of rights and to exclude them rather than to empower. The shadow cast by the citizen is the non-citizen. In India, for example, Ishita, don't worry, if people want to leave, they can leave. I mean, of all things for this lecture, nobody should be forced to sit through it if they have to leave. I'm just saying, I'm not embarrassed if people are, there are various reasons why people might want to leave. It may not be disapproval, it may be disapproval, I don't know. That's fine. Vote with your feet. It's absolutely fine. So citizenship. Why is citizenship a feminist issue? First, because citizenship is weaponized, as I said, and the shadow cast by the citizen is the non-citizen. There is never only a citizen. Your rights are in comparison to those who don't have that identity. In India, for example, the CAA and the NRC set up tests of citizenship that even middle-class people with multiple documents to prove who one's father is would fail. But this test will not be applied uniformly and seriously, as we know. It will only be applied to disenfranchised minorities, especially Muslims. The CAA is only meant to protect those Indian Hindus who got excluded by the Assam NRC. 12 lakh Bengali Hindus were excluded by the Assam NRC because the tests are impossible to meet. It's like a gender test also, by the way. That's a by the way point, that if there was someone standing at the door as we leave to test our gender, and what is the gender? It has to be, you have to match your external physical genitalia have to match your hormonal and chromosomal supposed binaries. If you don't meet those, you've not passed the gender test. I assure you, at least 60% of the people in this room will not pass the gender test. That's another story, we can come to it later. But a citizenship test, as we leave this room, most of us will fail. We don't have the documents, but if your name is a certain name, you will be allowed to pass anyway. So the CAA is only meant to protect those Indian Hindus who would have gotten excluded by the NRC. Now, we thought this, we imagined this when the CAA came into being, right? Again, like the Uttarakhand Civil Code, 5 years down the line, we can see it because the central government declared now on March 11, 2024, in response to an RTI, the RTI said how many people have applied for citizenship under the CAA, and the reply was that there is no provision under the CAA 2019 and its rules to maintain records of citizenship applications filed online. This is not a provision of the CAA. They do not maintain records of who have applied. So while the Home Minister declared कि लाखों करोड़ों लोगों का फायदा होगा from the CAA, the government is not prepared to take the risk of revealing the actual numbers of non-Indian Hindus who apply under CAA, because believe it or not, they are living, working and struggling in the countries of their birth, like all of us are, countries of their birth or citizenship as the case may be, as all of us are, and they are not dying to come running to India, which is the embrace of the Vishwaguru, which is like a bear hug. It's not a loving embrace. So believe it or not, we don't know, and we will never know. Supposing they had lakho karodo applications, would they not have made that public? The purpose of the CAA is now very clear. We knew it, but now they've proved it. We knew it, and the Uttarakhand Civil Code proved it. Because citizenship is primarily based on proof of birth in a heterosexual patriarchal family, an institution that structurally undergirds caste, class, and gender injustice, we need to question the assumption of citizenship by birth from the perspective of the biological familial foundation of citizenship. This foundation remains largely untaught and unquestioned in progressivist narratives of citizenship. Compulsory heterosexuality undergirds most forms of identity. Caste, race, and community identity are produced through birth. But what we fail to note and criticize adequately is that birth in a particular kind of family determines too the quintessentially modern identity of citizenship. So it's not just things like caste and religion, but even this modern identity. The purity of these identities, of these social formations, of existing regimes of property relations is protected by the strict policing and controlling of sexuality of women, because their wombs have to be under the control of this patriarchy at all times, because that child has to bear the father's name, which is impossible to establish even through DNA tests. So the only way you can be 100% sure that the womb contains that man's child is by making sure that woman has never left the home or has been strictly policed at all times. There is no way, as my father used to say, because he came from a Nair matrilineal society, he used to say, I think somewhat sadly, because he was a very patriarchal man, he would say, motherhood is a biological fact, fatherhood is a sociological fiction. And this is the anxiety that underlies patriarchy. This is the anxiety that patriarchy trembles under. The family as it exists, the only form in which it is allowed to exist, the heterosexual patriarchal family based on marriage and the sexual division of labor, is key to maintaining nation, state, and community. The imperative need is to restructure institutional and public spaces in such a manner that will enable the breaking down of the normativity of this form of family. But what would be the basis of citizenship then, if the naturalized notion of birth is deconstructed in this way? We would be forced to think of alternative sources of citizenship rights through claims to, so there's one kind of way which is claims to different kinds of family ties, heterogeneous and fluid forms of intimacy that refuse to be legible to the state. But more importantly, I think we need to recognize that citizenship should be located in place of labor, not birth. Why should we not cast citizenship rights within the frame of place of work, not place of birth? So Mahmoud Mamdani has argued in the context of Africa that the notion of citizens' rights as attached to place of birth has increasingly anti-democratic consequences because of the history of large-scale migration on the continent of Africa, which means that at any given time, hundreds of thousands of people are not living in the land of their birth, and they have no citizenship rights for a large part of their lifetime. what is interesting is that what he's helping us to see is he's rejecting the post-colonial assumption that cultural and political boundaries should coincide, and that the natural boundaries of a state are those of a common cultural community. Nation state implies this. And why do we continue to think of state? You can think of the state as a bureaucratic structure that helps to administer a territory. The moment you add nation state to it, you're opening up questions of ethnicism, ethnic cleansing. All of these are modern phenomena which arise after the rise of the nation state. The indigeneity as the litmus test for rights under the post-colonial state is what he's challenging. And he makes a very interesting argument that he rejects the nationalist wisdom that cultural communities rooted in a common past have a common future. If you look at any nationalist writing, regardless of whether it's Hindu right-wing or secular or whatever, whether it's Nehru or Savarkar, there is a claim to a 4,000-year-old history that India has. And this happens across Europe. In the 18th century, it happens across Africa. There is an understanding that that in order to have a common future, you have to have a common past. But what Mamdani is arguing is that political communities should not be defined by a common past, but by the resolve to forge a common future. He believes, therefore, that citizens' rights should be attached to place of labor, not birth. Consider the supporters of Hindutva politics of Indian origin, who live in the USA and UK and Europe, and unquestioningly take advantage of citizenship rights that protect immigrants and minorities. They publicly celebrate the Prime Minister of their erstwhile country, publicly observe their festivals, build their temples, even in Abu Dhabi, which the Prime Minister of India went to inaugurate, a Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi. Imagine the head of government of a West Asian state coming to India under this regime to inaugurate a mosque. Just imagine it for 1 second, have some fun. They even direct the foreign policy of political parties in the countries in which they live and work. For instance, UK's Labour Party backtracked on its Kashmir resolution, criticizing the lockdown of the state after the abrogation of Article 370 under pressure from multiple British Indian Hindutva-linked bodies. What are these people doing? They are demanding full citizenship rights for themselves in the country where they labor, while financially supporting the policies of Hindutva that disenfranchises minorities and immigrants in the countries who were actually born there. So it's this is very obviously it's such a double standard. The poet Rahat Indori's famous words, "Sabhi ka khoon shamil hai is mitti mein." You know the famous line is, "Hindustan kisi ke baap ka nahi hai." So, "Sabhi ka khoon shamil hai is mitti mein" indicate in my reading not just the shared blood of birth and martyrdom. We can derive a different sense of ownership of India from Indori's stirring words. I read khoon as used in the common term khoon pasina, the blood and sweat of toil. If our blood and sweat is fused with the soil, then it exceeds the mere accident of birth. In other words, we should take seriously the implications of the fact that the preamble of the Indian Constitution is in the name of Hum Bharat ke Log, not Hum Bharat ke Nagrik. How will everyone be looked after? Resources are not lacking. Distribution is the point. In Kerala, for instance, the children of immigrants from Bihar and UP get free education and everything else that residents of Kerala get. We recently learned that the total income of 63 individuals was greater than India's annual budget for 2018 to 2019. 63 individuals had an income greater than the budget of this country for 2018-2019. The organization which gave us this information, Oxfam, was promptly thrown out of India. Where did their income come from? These 63 people. They worked really hard, 48 hours a day. Subsidies for the poor is vote bank politics, subsidies for the rich is development. What was the cost of the now rejected NRC in Assam? 1,220 crore. Complete waste of public money, as it will now have to be repeated. It's going to be repeated. In December 2019, the Union Cabinet sanctioned 4,000 crore for the National Population Register, an exercise that overlaps with the census, is therefore redundant but which it has an important feature for Hindu Rashtra, the category of the doubtful citizen. Clearly, there is no shortage of resources in India to ensure state funding for basic human rights for all residents of this country, healthcare, education, and food. Many scholars and activists, therefore, have suggested that we need a political practice that questions the very legitimacy of sealed national borders that we have come to take for granted over the last century. National border regimes must be opened up, as well as the labor markets organized through them. There must be an end to discrimination based on one's nationality. These are the demands of the growing group of no borders activists across the world. No human is illegal. These are the slogans. A radical political practice is called for, struggles for a decolonized commons that challenges the barbed wire borders of nation states. May I take another little more time, please? So the final point with which I will conclude is with the idea of freedom, azadi. This word has reverberated across India in the past few years in an unexpected afterlife, reincarnated after the anti-imperialist struggle when azadi meant freedom from British rule. Now we hear it in multiple forms: azadi from, azadi to, azadi in. Azadi takes on different meanings, different layers in different contexts of protest. Sometimes we hear in it the lilting rhythms of poetry. Sometimes we hear in it the harsh tones of rage at injustice. What does azadi mean, really? For a feminism that goes beyond a narrow liberal interpretation, freedom cannot be only about individuals, but is inevitably linked to community. Single individual women cannot be free. Patriarchy has to end for any woman to be truly free. When we think about freedom, we have to simultaneously encounter the notions of choice and agency, and this is where some complications arise. This actually touches on some of the issues that Dr. Das had raised. When are women to be considered as victims needing protection, and when as active free agents engaging with power and carving out their own spaces? The notion of choice is not enough to answer this question, that if people choose to do something, it reflects their agency. It is not enough because freedom of choice is always exercised within strict boundaries that are non-negotiable, which are defined by economic class, race, caste, gender. The freedom to choose is never absolute. As Amartya Sen put it, nothing can be more elementary and universal than the fact that choices of all kinds in every area are always made within particular limits. The budget constraint, as economists call it, is omnipresent. The fact that every buyer has to make choices does not indicate that there is no budget constraint, but only that choices have to be made within the budget constraint that the person faces. What is true in elementary economics is also true in complex political and social decisions, unquote. So what we are saying as feminists is women make choices, but they do not always make choices in the circumstances of their own making, to paraphrase Marx. Often women choose options that go counter to normative feminist values. So what we are facing here is a contradiction between two core beliefs of feminism. So our arguments and discussions have to go beyond just challenging patriarchy. That's a simple debate in a sense. The internal debates of feminism are much more crucial now and have been for a while. So what are these two core beliefs which are in a way in contradiction? One is the belief in the autonomy of women and their ability to act as agents. But two is the simultaneous belief in the hegemony of dominant power-laden values that constrain the freedom to choose. That is, the values that we feminists consider to be desirable are not the dominant ones in society, and therefore the freedom to choose most often simply reasserts existing dominant values, which from our feminist point of view are deeply problematic. So, for example, a woman may choose to abort a fetus because it's female, or to acquiesce to a marriage in which her natal family will be bankrupt by dowry requirements, or to participate in a beauty contest that commodifies her body, or to take up sex work as a livelihood option. All of these would be hotly contested within feminism. What operates here may not be free will in some perfect feminist sense, but at the same time, we cannot characterize it as a lack of free will. Because then that would only work if, as feminists, we are saying we know what's right, you have false consciousness. And that's not feminism to say that. We need to face up to this troubling recognition in our politics. What this means is that we have no easy answers to questions about freedom, and the perfect example of this conundrum right now is the issue of the hijab. Women in India claiming the right to wear hijab, women in Iran burning it. At one level, it appears to be very simply a matter of coercion or freedom of choice in both places. At one level, it is true, but it is more than this. Listening to Iranian women talk about the protests, we learn that their struggle is not against Islam. It is not even really about the hijab everywhere and at all times. It is not even about the hijab alone in Iran. What we are witnessing in Iran, they say, the Iranian feminists, what we are witnessing in Iran is reflected all over the world, where there is resistance to the gendered ways in which all states control populations. And it's not only women who are so controlled. For example, they gave this example. This was actually a discussion on a website called Jadaliya, Jadaliyya. It's a fantastic website. And they pointed out at that time when this panel discussion was going on, Russian men were at the borders of Russia trying to escape compulsory conscription. They did not want to go and die in Ukraine in a war that was not their choice. It was not their war. A war is never a border war is never a people's war. It's always a war determined by the elites of both countries. So they were voting with their feet, as I was saying, you are free to, which is they were at the borders of Russia trying to escape compulsory conscription of all men of war age. So what they were saying is that whether it's compulsory conscription in wars that people have no interest in, or by making hijab central to the reason of state, in Iran by compulsory veiling, in France and in India by compulsory unveiling. France is the best example for very, very purportedly secular reasons. It prevents Muslim women from appearing Muslim in public. Or in the USA by denying autonomy over their bodies to women by criminalizing abortion. So this is more than simply about, it's more than simply about just wearing the veil or not wearing the veil. It is about the way, or about Islam. It is, so when we're talking about freedom, we are saying that what this means is we're talking about the gendered ways in which states control populations. So it is in this background that one reflects on freedom as a feminist. While a certain kind of liberal feminism focuses purely on equality between the sexes without taking into account any other structure of power, it should be clear by now that the feminism that shapes my understanding and many, many, many feminists' understanding is located inside and imbricated into multiple other forms of oppression that shape the societies in which we live. If we look at how feminist utterances on freedom emerge from this point of view, we see that while at one level, feminism is a quintessentially modern philosophy in the sense that we can look at figures pre-19th century in different cultures and see whether they fought patriarchy or not and so on. But feminism as an ideology is very much a modern ideology. And yet because its ferocious critique is directed precisely at modernity's failure to deliver on the promise of the universal emancipated individual. But at another level, like other modernist assertions such as from Dalits and Marxists, the feminist claim to individual autonomy is accompanied by an insertion of the individual self back into a radically reconstituted or newly created community. The story of self-emergence then is inextricably linked to narratives of other selves. If you read the memoirs of Dalit women like Vimal More and Urmila Pawar, you see how the very modern idea of memoir is itself subverted by them. The autobiography or memoir as a literary form is classically predicated upon the sense of an individuated self that emerged with modernity, where there is a self that can say, this is my autobiography. But when feminists or Dalits or Marxists, and a person could be all three, of course, when these write memoirs, the story of self-emergence is inextricably linked to narratives of other selves in a community. Freedom from a feminist perspective is always a collective enterprise. Pandita Ramabai, at the turn of the 19th century, challenging the authorities of the Church of England, so she'd converted to Christianity, but then she challenged the authorities of the Church of England, saying, I have a conscience and a mind of my own. I have with great effort freed myself from the yoke of the Indian priestly tribe, so I am not at present willing to place myself under another similar yoke by accepting everything that comes from priests as the authorized command of the Most High. Like Ambedkar, Ramabai's religious conversion was not exclusively the freedom of emerging from a community into an autonomous individual, because all she had to do was leave Hinduism in that case, or Ambedkar to leave Hinduism. But the seeking of freedom as an individual within another community, a new community of which there are great expectations, which in Ramabai's case were not being met. I also want to consider the link between freedom and labor. Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, in a short story written in the early 20th century, Sultana's Dream, imagined a world in which emancipation from the drudgery of menial labor was brought about through technology and machines. Ambedkar had a similar vision, and both see one aspect of freedom as liberation from enforced demeaning division of labor between castes and genders. It's actually interesting to compare Sultana's Dream and Ambedkar's essay called Gandhism and Hind Swaraj of Gandhi, to see how Gandhi celebrates manual labor as a way of entering into freedom, whereas his caste, class, and gender location. And Ambedkar's answer is there has to be machinery and more machinery. That is how he responds to Hind Swaraj. More and more machinery, because he comes from a location in which manual labor was expected, manual demeaning labor was expected of him. Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, as a woman, knows what manual, demeaning, compulsory labor is. Both of them think about technology in very different ways. Interestingly, Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain thinks of technology in a very, very futuristic way. It's all solar-powered and wind-powered and so on. She's really way ahead of her time. Sultana's Dream is an extraordinary story. Scholars such as Kathy Weeks view work as alienated wage labor alone and imagine a world in which one would not need to work. However, drawing on Ambedkar and Hussain, I suggest we need to use two terms, labor and work. We should see work as activity that can be and is performed by all human and non-humans, and retain the term labor for waged or unwaged work involving exploitation and alienation. Because everything is work that humans and non-humans do, from singing to swimming to grazing to working on a construction site to thinking. It is alienated labor if it does not contain elements of self-creation and if it involves exploitation or extraction of surplus value by another. Developing the idea of alienation away from its humanist form in Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts, we can imagine elements of alienation in unwaged work, for example, household labor, and moments of non-alienation in otherwise exploitative labor through which humans survive that exploitative labor, the music of slaves, the music of migrant labor, for instance, or the unalienated moments inherent in the paid labor of teaching or in the work of studying. The goal would not be then freedom from work, but to escape labor and to resist capitalism. Now returning to Azadi, I'm concluding now, as a 21st century slogan reverberating throughout India. It's interesting to see how did Azadi become such a huge slogan in India. When did it re-enter public spaces after anti-imperialist struggles had ended? The feminist activist Kamala Bhasin recollects that she first heard the chant for Azadi in 1984 among feminists in Pakistan vocal against the regime of Ziaul Haq. So the slogan Azadi, so these cross-border interactions of labor movements and feminist movements is very common. The sari I'm wearing is from Bangladesh, by the way. Because we all have feminist connections across borders. There are feminist and labor solidarities across borders. And Kamala Bhasin recollects that she first heard the chant for Azadi among feminists in Pakistan, and the first voices against Ziaul Haq came from Pakistani feminists. And the chant at that time went, Aurat ka nara Azadi, Bachon ka nara Azadi, Hum leke rahenge Azadi, Hai pyara nara Azadi. It gradually came into India at feminist events and protests through the long interconnections of South Asian feminism that crosses the barbed wire borders between our countries. And if you look at how Azadi is configured now, it means so many different things in different events and protests, depending on who the people are. It can mean freedom from oppressive structures such as Manuvad, heteropatriarchy and capitalism. It can mean freedom to be what one wants to be. All these different slogans swirl around in conversation and argumentation, agreement and disagreement with one another, building a vision of freedom as deeply rooted in a democratic, argumentative, contentious community of heterogeneous identities. In short, to conclude, we will build a world in which we work from our personal and private spaces outwards. From the personal and private spaces in which we are located, we move outwards. We refuse to participate in the assembling of the current social order. We just keep dismantling it, one layer, one thread at a time, and gradually the very ground shifts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Menon. It has been an absolutely enthralling, I think, 1 hour or so that we have been listening to you. How do you sum this up? You really can't, and I won't really give it a try, but I will come back to what I started with, is I think what her talk establishes further is the need to talk and the need to communicate. So I'll throw the stage open for question and answer. Are the volunteers ready? I need one volunteer downstairs and I need one upstairs with the mic. So if the volunteers can volunteer.
Hello, hello.
If you have a question, please raise your hand when I ask you to. And please introduce yourself and limit yourself to one question, because I believe there will be many. Moinak, you will be upstairs.
Firstly, thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture. My name is Shreya Kormokar and I'm from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. My question to you is, while talking about feminism, we always talk about gender roles, discriminated division of labor, but how do we incorporate the sex workers who are indeed seen as means of production and reproduction into the 21st century feminism? While these workers, mostly women, don't even have the access to their basic rights. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, would you be taking one question?
Three questions.
Three questions. Okay, one more from downstairs.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for such an insightful talk. Ma'am, since you mentioned the word climate...
If you don't mind, name.
Yeah, sorry. My name is Orgo Mukherjee, ma'am. I'm a former student of this college, Scottish State. So my question is, you mentioned the word climate change. So I just wanted to understand from your perspective, do you think climate change is a feminist issue?
What is the word?
Climate change as a feminist...
Climate change.
Yes,
Okay.
Like from a feminist perspective, I wanted to hear from your side.
Maybe we can take one from upstairs. If I can have a show of hands upstairs. Okay, they are still shy. So maybe from somewhere down. Okay, some from the back then.
No, there's somebody. Sorry, there are students.
Ask.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anakshi Das from this college only. I passed out in 2021. My question is, what is your opinion on Smriti Irani's Minister of Women and Child Development statement on providing menstruation leave to women?
What leave?
Menstruation leave.
Menstruation leave, okay. Okay, I'll just take these three. Shreya, as you know, please don't stand when I call your name. I'm just addressing you, that's all. So the thing is, as you are aware, there is a debate within feminism in which many feminists believe that prostitution is violence. They see prostitution as drawing in people, women, mostly women, but there are trans people in sex work as well. So they use the word prostitution deliberately. They see prostitution as violence. They see prostitution as reinforcing patriarchy and caste and class divisions. Many of them argue that mostly it is Dalit women who are prostitutes and that they come from those kinds of communities in which they have no other option, and so on. That is one kind of argument. The other kind of argument which I believe in is, and that comes from where? So I believe that in this voice, there is no one who is saying, there are no sex workers in the group of feminists who are saying prostitution is violence. And prostitution can be violent, and there is trafficking, and there is forced sex work. But what is the point of people who say that they are sex workers is that these are unionized people who are insisting that sex work is work like any other. There are, after all, Dalit women who are Dalit women and Dalit people who are part of these sex worker movements as well. And what they force us to see is that question of choice that I discussed, which is so complicated. They're asking the question, how free is marriage? Who are all these women who are freely and voluntarily in marriage, giving their bodies to their husbands, whenever the husbands choose? Do they get sexual pleasure? Is there any question asked about that, etc.? And as you know, marital rape in this country is not a crime. Now, which means that you can be daily raped by your husband and you have no choice. So they are forcing us to see that there is a moralistic, controlling argument behind policing, moral sexuality policing argument behind those who say prostitution is violence. Because the prostitution is violence, feminists are speaking on behalf of women who are prostitutes, whereas sex workers are speaking for themselves. We should ideally be in a feminist universe. Thank you for bringing up this question, because literally there could be 20 issues. So this is an issue that I would like to... You don't know that I'm not a sex worker. How do you know? How do you know how I supplement my income? We should be able to acknowledge that every one man, woman, or any other gender present in this room could be a sex worker and not feel insulted when someone says that, because it is not an insult. You don't feel insulted if someone says you're a manual scavenger. We should be deeply ashamed. So ashamed. I don't have the words to describe the depth of shame we should have for manual scavenging. Is it more humiliating or exploitative to be a manual scavenger than to be a sex worker? So what sex workers are saying is that sex work is work. Don't mystify sex. And if you treat sex work as work, and if we are powerful as unions, we will ensure better conditions of work. Now, there's a kind of argument which says that if you ask them, they like their children to be sex workers, they will say no. Please go ask your mothers who are housewives, do you want your daughters to be housewives? Please go ask them. Most mothers will say no. Most mothers will say go and get married, but make sure you are economically independent. Every mother will say this to her daughter, okay? So that doesn't mean, and of course, someone who's a domestic servant doesn't want her daughter to be a domestic servant, etc. So I feel that from my kind of feminism, which takes sex workers seriously, where a sex worker would be speaking for themselves. See, the assumption is there are feminists and then there are sex workers. No, sex workers are feminists also. And they will have their things to say, and they will sit with you on a panel, and they will speak, and they should speak. And there should be complete confusion in everybody's minds about who is a sex worker and who is not. Everyone may not accept that they're a sex worker. But as I said, you have to be prepared to accept that slut is not an insult. Sex worker is not an insult. It is not an insult. We refuse to accept it as an insult. So that's one thing. Arup, I think, if I got your name correctly. Sorry? Orgo. Sorry, I heard it as Arup. Orgo. So climate change is very, very much a feminist issue. And I will go, there are long histories of ecofeminism, which make a certain kind of argument that women are, because of I think they are maligned as making a biologically essentialist argument, ecofeminists, like Vandana Shiva and so on, because it is, why are women closer to nature just because they are biologically? I think the argument is about the social role in reproduction that women play. That is the argument that ecofeminists are making, that women, because of their social role in reproduction, are the ones who have to walk miles to get water, are the ones who have to see their children, die for lack of water and so on and so forth. And that there's there's a deeper psychoanalytic argument here, which is that because you bear the child in your womb, there is a connection that doesn't break with continuing life. So it's still not, I think, a biological argument, but it is a psychoanalytic argument. If you're a body that has been assigned gender female at birth, whether you've actually given birth or not, there is a way in which you recognize your body for what it is and its connection. These are the arguments that ecofeminists make. But you don't have to be an ecofeminist. That's a kind of what we used to call radical feminism in olden times, and I think gender studies should give up this radical feminist, liberal feminist, Marxist feminists divide. Now we are all feminists by issue, so sex work is work versus prostitution is violence. You will find all these kinds of feminists on both sides. But I think the more interesting for me feminist point of view on climate change comes from the degrowth feminists. So degrowth, D-E-G-R-O-W-T-H, some of you may have heard of it, is a movement that emerges out of Europe, which says there is absolutely nothing to be done to save this planet and ourselves, but to give up on the idea of economic growth. Give up, downsize, live locally, live in smaller communities. So degrowth, again, you'll find their site somewhere. So degrowth has a strong feminist perspective as well. So just to give you maybe an example is to say, for example, if you say solar energy, and then solar energy means huge solar energy parks across Karnataka, the drought-ridden areas of Karnataka, Rajasthan, etc., owned by one or two individuals. That is simply powering capitalism again. If we are going to take solar energy seriously, it has to be utterly local. It has to be household by household. It has to be, you see, so degrowth is not something that Marxists like or take seriously at all. Degrowth is seen as some kind of Luddite, backward-looking, but in fact it is extremely future-looking, future-oriented. And so, for example, if you take something that Obama said when in his second term, he said, we will draw power from the sun and the power of the wind to run our factories and run our cars. So your factories and cars are going to carry on, and you think that the sun and all of this will be available to you forever. These are renewable, but so it's a question of really completely rethinking at least two things, which is the idea of what is, look at this room, for example, and this is, I've sat in many, many, many rooms like this across my universities, including my own. Bright sunlight outside, we have to have all the lights on, because that is what the architecture has done. It's not using local materials, it's not thinking of using and working with local factors. Like Delhi summers, bright as bright, all lights have to be on at all times inside rooms. And as you know, air conditioning is a catch-22. I don't know if you've read Joseph Heller's catch-22, but basically, the more air conditioners you use, the more air conditioners are needed. So so climate change is very much a feminist issue, and I look at it from a degrowth perspective. See, menstruation leave, I don't really want to cite Smriti Irani, who is not my source of, nor yours, I assume, source of any kind of feminist thinking, but, barely even, anyway, never mind, thinking, let's say. But let's say that period leave and menstruation leave is something that feminists are debating hotly today. My generation of feminists is more uncomfortable with it than younger generation of feminists. This is worth thinking about. Why? Because and I'm not saying we are right, and I'm not saying, for me the issue is not decided. It comes from, in a way, so what is my discomfort with period leave? My discomfort is that we spend decades and decades and decades saying women can do everything. We can be equally productive. Don't throw our bodies in our face. Yes, we are pregnant. We deserve 6 months of maternity leave, but after that we can come back and work, and so on, right? But if you're a woman who has, and I assume something like 50% of women in this room experience very, very painful periods, what do we recognize that as? And how does not recognizing it, so one doesn't want to think of it as a disability, but one wants to think of it as difference. If we rethink disability as something that is produced by a society which is, in a world which is constructed for a certain kind of body, right? For example, supposing it was this world, supposing it's not true ki andho mein kana raja. No, it is not true. Andon ki duniya mein, you will be completely at a loss. Let me give you one small story. One of my friends who was sighted was visiting a friend who was not sighted, he calls himself blind, in an institution where they work. It was like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening in Delhi winter, which can get very dark. So he visits this friend, they're sitting and chatting, it's getting darker and darker and darker. And then at some point, the sighted friend says, Batti jala de. And the blind friend laughs and says, Jala do tumhe zarurat ho to. Zarurat tumhari hai, meri nahi hai. He was perfectly fine in that dark room. So imagine if this room was pitch dark because it was assumed that everybody is blind. Imagine if there were only ramps and no stairs because it is assumed that everybody is on wheelchairs. Imagine that it is assumed that everybody menstruates. And then what are the kinds of changes that you would see in this world? So my point is, the jury is out in my head. My head is obviously a very noisy place. And I'm actually intrigued by the way the older feminists like me are more uncomfortable with the idea of menstruation leave than younger feminists who are saying, who have grown up in a world where some things they have taken for granted because of decades of feminism. And they are like now confident enough to say, I have a womb, I bleed, and sometimes it's really painful and I can't actually work. So if you have not personally experienced that, so what happens is women of my generation, I'm going to do this generation thing because I think there is, in this case, a very strong generational difference. Those of us who went through our periods, either who didn't have any problems when we were having our periods, or we thought this is not something you ever talk about. You just, not because you're ashamed, you're saying I have my period, and it's not that. It's more that I'm not going to let my body defeat me. So this is what people with disability have been, and this word disability is problematic, as I just explained. The disability is coming from a world which assumes a certain thing to be true, a certain body to be the norm. So if now, I am sympathetic actually to any politics which challenges a certain body or a certain identity as the norm. So I am sympathetic to the politics of, and so when it comes from a minister of this government, I feel it feeds, so you have to, no position is that, no position is so clear that you know that this is coming from a feminist position and this is not coming from a feminist position. Sometimes feminists and non-feminists can agree on some issue, but for completely different reasons, right? For example, take rape. Why do I think rape is a heinous crime? Because it violates the woman's bodily, or the person's bodily autonomy and agency and decision about what that body can and should not do. The reason why for a patriarchal society rape is terrible is because it takes away the honor of the family and it potentially violates that womb. It potentially lets the womb be free of patriarchal constraints, and who knows then what will happen, right? So we're both saying rape is bad. Nobody in this society says rape is good, but for completely different reasons. So I'm not going to take the, I'm going to take very suspiciously the, because, link it to the Uttarakhand Civil Code. See what they're expecting women to be. It'll be a next step to say because women have periods, we don't think they should be working at all because Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and mothers are, and sisters and all of that. It's a short step away. But if we want to say there should be menstrual leave, it has to come from a queer feminist Ambedkarite perspective. Then it's like in your face, right? So that's what my longish answer to your fairly short question was.
We'll take questions from upstairs. So yes. Maybe the boy can have the question. Upstairs. Yes, upstairs.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Rukota from the Scottish Church College and from the Political Science Department itself. So basically when we open educational portals or any official portals, we see that by default, there is father/guardian's name. And when we fill up the form and the forms come out, there is XX in the case of my form because I proudly use my mother's name and not my father's name. So why is this default and how do we change the course of this first? Because when I go back and again fill a form, there will be by default, father/guardian's name and not mother/guardian's name. So this is my question to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Abhisambodha Mukherjee from this college only. Ma'am, what is your idea of India? Is India a nation state or is India an state with an appropriated cultural identity? Thank you.
Maybe another question from down here.
Ma'am, one more from me. Ma'am, my name is Moinak Bhattacharya, Department of History, Semester 6. Ma'am, two issues you mentioned, I want to ask a question based on that, particularly legal justice in cases of sexual violence and the sexual division of labor. In my belief, it can be linked to general government efficiency in dispensing some mitigating strategies towards these issues. So do you think these are linked to general government efficiency? Will general government efficiency will they have butterfly effect in solving questions related to feminism, or are concerted efforts still needed at this stage? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, father, guardian's name. Did you say your name was Nupur? Roopkatha. Sorry, I'm North Indianizing all your Bengali names. Roopkatha. This father, guardian's name, I think you know really the answer to this. You really just want to bring it to our understanding that, we want to bring it to our attention that this is actually assumed, right? That the father is the identity is your identity, is your father's identity. This is very much there in every context. It's there in things like caste identity. If you want to say that I am of this particular caste, if your father is not of that caste, then the courts don't permit you. So this is what I was talking about, the source of all identity, legitimate identity, especially in our society, is the patriarchal heterosexual family. So the patriarchy part is very, and we have to fight it in different ways, like the students' union or the teachers' union, etc. For example, in JNU, ever since I've been there, and in spite of multiple letters to the administration, nothing to do with now, I mean for ages, for decades, women students have to write Miss or Mrs. before their name. It says so. Women students may write Miss or Mrs. as the case may be. Now, you may have heard of Geeta Hariharan's case. Geeta Hariharan is a novelist. She won the case to have her name as the guardian. So, strictly speaking, it should be parent/guardian's name. Or ideally, just guardian's name. Why does it have to be even parent? What is this valorizing of biological parenthood, right? So ideally we should be fighting against that, and this is something you can only keep saying and fighting and arguing, but obviously I completely agree with you that it should not be like this, but it is like this. This is the source of identity, which is why I'm saying citizenship is a feminist issue. And the assumption is that that's why, as I said, because fatherhood is a sociological fiction, it has to be continuously tied through forms, through birth certificates, through etc., right? Because otherwise, you know that, some of you may have read this in my book, and I love saying this example from Mrityudand, this old film. I'm sorry, I'll just say it again in case there are two people in this room who haven't read it. Seen Mrityudand. Madhuri Dixit and Shabana Azmi are sisters-in-law. Shabana Azmi's husband is impotent, so she cannot have a child. She runs away. That's a Brahmin family. She runs away with a Yadav who happens to be Om Puri. That's irrelevant, but I just remember him so well. So she's away from the house for many, like a year or whatever. Then she comes back to her in-laws' home, the two sisters-in-law. Madhuri Dixit is at the door. Shabana is entering very, very visibly pregnant. And Madhuri's first question is, Didi, ye bacha kiska hai? Now just think about this question. This question did not need to be asked. It was in her body. And she says, Mera. That's the answer, right? And the question, kiska bacha hai, to a pregnant woman, is only a question that makes sense in a patriarchal society. It makes no sense. It is a senseless question. If you know the forms of human reproduction, it makes no sense. It makes no sense in a matrilineal society. It didn't make sense among Nayars. Nobody cared who the father was. It was irrelevant. So we need to argue this out and fight it out. Is India a nation state? So I feel that I would say that all nation states are in the process of becoming. There is no nation state that is formed. It is continually a project of becoming, because what a nation state involves is the idea that there is one cultural identity, one language, and anything else that raises a question is either illegitimate or has to be assimilated. So go to very old nation states. Go to France, go to England. What is happening in the so-called UK now? Scotland is claiming independence. Wales, their languages are coming back. All those languages were demolished. When Scottish people spoke English on BBC, they subtitled it because the British couldn't understand their accent. That was not a British accent. That was just a very pathetic attempt to sound British. But so what you see is a resurgence of those identities, those languages. And in France, for example, in order to make French the language, other languages were sidelined. Flemish. I don't know if you have time for a slightly longer answer to this question. I'll shorten the answer. So then, yeah, there's a point I was going to make, but that would have involved a little bit of a ramble. So is India a nation state? All nation states are in a state of, so Ernst Renan put it beautifully, right? A nation state is a state of continuous plebiscite. So you have to see a nation state as continuously in the process of becoming. It's not always already a nation state. Every day there are challenges. Every day you have to meet it. These can be met democratically. These can be met in an authoritarian way. But all nation states have to assert one dominant identity. So that's one. Moinak, I'm not sure I got your question about legal justice and sexual division of labor. That is it just a question of government efficiency? I think you're asking, is it just a question of making the government more efficient, more accountable? Will that sort these things out? No, it won't at all. Not at all. Because sexual violence and the sexual division of labor are outside the realms of the law, right? They are happening in everyday life. And so government efficiency is one thing and we have to push for it. But even the kind of laws that are there, we want to affect. No? So it has to start outside the state and government.
We'll take questions from downstairs. She has been trying to ask a question for long. Achha, okay.
Thank you, madam. I had the opportunity for hearing you in Golpark Ramakrishna Mission also. And today, I think no one in this hall can disagree with a single sentence that you have uttered. Okay. It's a grand speech. My question is that when we were growing up in the 80s, early 90s, it was easier to be a feminist than it is now, particularly in the context of decreasing job market and increasing dole-based politics. Is it true?
What based politics?
Dole-based politics.
Dole.
Yes.
Can you explain dole-based politics?
Offering grants, special grants to women. Okay. Maybe it is for limited period, but those kind of grant-based politics, Kanyashri or other things, Lokhi Bhandar, Kanyashri. Okay. In the context of this dole-based politics, got it. It's difficult, I feel, for the majority.
Okay. Mm. Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Anushka Mukherjee. Sir, please use the mic. Okay, fine. My name is Anushka Mukherjee. I'm from Bethune College. I have a situation, not a question, and I want to know your view. So, let's say a lady was...
I think people automatically also...
Hello? Okay, fine. Can you hear me, ma'am? Yes. the situation is, let's say a lady was raped and then she gets pregnant, and we know that feminism is associated with the notion of motherhood. So the child will become the constant reminder of the trauma, or she can give birth and take care of the child. Like, what will be her stand here?
One more question from the back, maybe. Yes, one more question. From the back, Is that the last question?
I'm quite happy. I'll keep it short.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Arja. My name is Arja. Ma'am, my question is that recently in USA we have seen that there are a number of genders that have been said by the government is being identified, and a lot of people are using it to escape from punishment. Like recently there was an incident when a man who was charged with rape, he came to the court and he identified as a trans woman, and he was not convicted and was like let go of it. So ma'am, but we also know that it is needed that we need to recognize the LGBTQIA plus community. So ma'am, how do we draw a line between these? There's a very thin line between this, so how do we draw that?
Okay, I have been told to keep my answers short, I'm sorry. Okay, no, you're right. We want to hear more from the audience. So was it easier to be a feminist in the 80s as opposed to the dole-based? See, I do not accept the idea of the dole as a problem. I just don't. Anything like reservations, anything like social security is a social right. And whether it is a reservation based on caste or reservation based on women, it does not have to do with ancient history, it doesn't have to do with biological bodies, it deals with contemporary social disabilities, and these are necessary. For example, when women PhD candidates are given a few extra years to complete their PhD, it is because those women are fully entrapped in the sexual division of labor, and they are doing their PhD over and above all those other responsibilities. So I don't think that, I don't accept this word. This word dole is a very derogatory word used for social security in the West, as if these people are just so lazily sitting around and not working. So I have an issue with that. I'm not sure what it means to say, was it easier to be a feminist? No, it was only easier. It was only easier because we didn't know enough. We lived our privileged lives, and we thought if I get to study and if I get someone else to study, that's feminism. And then you realize there is your caste privilege. Recognizing our privileges is what has made feminism difficult, and that's a good thing. Feminism was easy only when you thought of yourself as I'm oppressed. But suddenly you are also a certain caste and you're a certain class and you're forced to see it because of the movements. Then it's like, oh, but I also have a lot of privilege. And you can't just only say, so it was easier for the wrong reasons, if at all it was easy. I'm not sure, Anushka, what you want. Feminism is not associated with motherhood. I'm not sure what you mean by that. It's not associated with motherhood in any way. Feminism has a certain understanding of motherhood as something that should be valued and recognized, and especially motherhood should not be tied to marriage, etc. But I don't see what that has to do with what you want to do with a fetus in your womb is your choice. If you were raped, but you don't mind bringing up a child and you think this is the only way I can bring up a child, you bring up that child. If you feel that this is actually going to be a sign of my moment of absolute trauma and lack of dignity and horror, then I will abort that child. Both these options should be open to me, and both are feminist options. I don't know, this is some misunderstanding about what is happening in the USA. That the US government, so first of all, the US government has not identified any genders. The whole business about multiple genders is something that is hotly fought in the US, and it is being challenged by conservative Christian right wing at every turn. These kinds of anecdotal stories that a man escaped rape by claiming to be a trans woman, I want to know about the case, I want to know the details about the case. You can't just throw out something like this. This is the kind of thing people used to say, I know a woman who did X and X, and then she told her husband, then she exploited her husband. I want to know the case properly. I am not aware of any case in which a man accused of rape escaped that punishment because he claimed to be a trans woman. Seems to me, you may be right. I mean, I may not have heard of this case, but I want to know then how are you assuming that the acquittal was unjust? Why are you assuming the acquittal was unjust? If the person showed that she was a trans woman, maybe she was able to show that there was no way in which she could have raped that person, right? I don't know. We don't know anything. You can't just, so please don't go by these kinds of transphobic and see what is the real worry? Once you start saying there are more than two genders, then what will happen to this world? What will happen to this world is what should happen. It will get complicated, it will get messed up, it will confuse us. Today we have a child who was assigned gender male at birth. Tomorrow he says I'm non-binary, or he says I'm a girl. We'll have to change. So it makes life more difficult for us. So in that sense, feminism is certainly more difficult.
For the time being, we'll take two questions, one from the top and one from below. So one from the top.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Shonga from Political Science Department of this college. Ma'am, considering the point of view you had put on the certainty of punishment regarding rape, ma'am, what is your point of view on the Article 35 of IPC, which doesn't criminalize marital rape until and unless the wife is a minor?
No, even then not. If you're married, then it's not a crime. To the minor. If you're married to the minor, it's not a crime.
Ma'am, but then
I'm just saying, that's just a factual correction. Yeah, what do I think about marital rape not being a crime?
And ma'am, specifically, what kind of punishment do you insist other than getting 2 or 7 years of jail?
Okay. All right. Right.
Am I audible? Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Tanushri. I teach political science in the Bhawanipur Education Society College, Kolkata. Ma'am, my question is, may it be heterosexual or queer relationships, what kind of laws can we expect out of the state to protect either partners in a relationship from sexual or emotional abuse without having to get into the process of, legally registering your marriage? And I mean both queer and non-queer. Thank you, ma'am.
You're taking just two? This person, I'm not in, I can take another. I don't mind. It depends on.
Hello? No, actually it's not a whole question. I'm Madhuchanda Karlekar. I just butted in when you were answering him upstairs, and I was saying that maybe he doesn't know that the definition of rape has changed, and we've been working towards that. So, that's it.
Maybe we can take two questions. If we have time, we can take one.
Yeah, we can take two. So this was not a question, so we can take it. Yeah. Although the marital rape is still not a crime. That was the point, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, ma'am, for the very illuminating talk. Although I do not agree to all the points that you have said.
What?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
And I belong to the Department of English, so I am not initiated so much as you might say to feminism, and this might be a very unpopular question, judging by the response of the audience and the gender proportions. But even then, I feel that at one point in your talk, you had said that women take up different courses and skill enhancement kind of things so that they are able to travel with their husbands and find part-time employments and such other things. So it's really very difficult for a woman to have a sustained kind of an employment a career-based employment. So now we have heard that feminism has done a lot for empowering women, but the problem is they have forgotten that they should have also educated the men to deal with and accept such empowered women. So I am just kind of extending that to a little more, extending that kind of a little more. So what I am saying is that, true, women have always been tagging along with their husbands and finding employments part-time and whatever. But I am also pretty sure, and correct me if I am wrong, that all the women who are employed are a kind of additional source of income or a secondary income to the family. There are not too many women who are the sole breadwinners of the family. Secondary in the sense additional.
Let him complete.
It's not,
Let
sometimes
Professor
more.
Menon
Let him
answer.
complete.
I think let her answer.
Please let him
are you
complete his
finished?
question.
Sometimes more.
Because otherwise you will be proving him right that there is some way in which he cannot speak here. Please let him. Yes, please.
So that's why I said it might be very unpopular. So my point is, I'm not saying that it's secondary in that sense, and that was perhaps the wrong term, but I'm saying that that's not the primary income. So that's an additional income that augments the family income. Now my point is, what has feminism done to make sure, or what is the role of feminism that should be there to, also encourage this, that women can also be the sole breadwinner of the family and they could also marry unemployed guys and take care of them and he can move along with her. That is my question.
Okay. So,
Okay, please.
marital. Okay, I'm going to go with
Can
the
we have calm in the hall?
people. Can I? They're all so amused that I can't speak. Okay, why?
Please.
How to make marital rape punishable? That was the question. The first question today here just now. How to make marital rape punishable? See, I actually don't. My personal opinion is marital rape should be grounds for divorce. It should be a civil crime, not a criminal act. I believe that marital rape should not come under the criminal law, because or at least the option should be there that it's a ground for rape, because basically, the ground for divorce, because basically, if you have been raped and the wife wants, I think there should be two options. She can go for criminal procedures. She may just be feeling so humiliated and hurt and upset that she may want to put him in jail. So she may choose the criminal option. If I were her friend, I would counsel her, leave this man, let him go, divorce him, get on with your life. Because to get marital rape proved, even if it were a crime, and if you were able to recognize it, she would spend the best years of her life fighting this in a court instead of leaving him, getting alimony, which she should, and I'll explain why in a minute, and looking after the children. That's my understanding of a better way of dealing. In other words, we have to keep questioning the compulsoriness of marriage and the permanence of marriage as an institution. We have to keep questioning that. So that's one. What kind of laws, this was Dhanushri, right? I'm just going to give up. I'm either Malayalifying it or Hindifying it. What kind of laws to protect partners from sexual violence without the relationship being recognized? Actually, as it happens, you can use existing criminal laws, no? There are laws against sexual violence, there are laws against violence. You can use that to accuse an intimate partner of violence in the same way as you would a stranger. So you don't really need to be recognized by the state as in an intimate relationship to deal with sexual violence. What could happen is that if there is gender neutrality of the victim, then that could take care of queer relationships. But if there is no gender neutrality of the perpetrator, then that leaves certain kinds of rapes untrackable. So these are bigger discussions, because in the feminist movement, there's been a kind of a crack between queer and feminist solidarities, because feminists, especially again of a different generation like Flavia Agnes and so on, have been very uncomfortable with the idea of the gender neutrality of the perpetrator, because gender neutrality of the victim they accept, I also accept, but gender neutrality of the perpetrator could lead to immediate, you know what happens in India, I lodge an FIR against you, you immediately lodge an FIR against me, right? This is the standard practice. So the woman who accuses a man of rape can file a counter charge of rape against her. It might work against women to have gender neutrality of perpetrator. On the other hand, the queer movement is like, but this does not take care of the rape of trans women by men, etc., or women by other women, etc. So this is, right now, there's no gender neutrality of perpetrator. There's only men are assumed to be whatever. Yeah. Okay, so that's one. See, your question is actually, it's very moving in a way, right? Because I take it very seriously, because you are, I think, on the cusp of two worlds. I can see I can see you're young. It's not like you're an older person, but you're on the cusp of two worlds. You've taken certain patriarchal things for granted, but you're faced, as you say, with empowered women. So when you, for example, say that it is usually a secondary income for women, perhaps you should ask yourself, why is that, right? It's not as if women from the age of 12 are longing to earn a secondary income to their husband. They would like to be full earners. They would like to be independent. They would like not to have to Do you understand that 75% of women in this country are trained only for marriage? They're not given any other training. And when then that marriage fails, they're left with nothing. So you need to be asking yourself, let's start from the other side. What would an equal relationship look like of an empowered man and an empowered woman, right? Many women would be perfectly comfortable if they are with some man and he doesn't have a job. It's not as if the women will immediately abandon the man. In fact, if you look at the statistics in this country, most households are single woman headed, because you have to think of the working class women. So the statistics show that in fact most women are the primary breadwinners of their households. It's not only our world, right? So you might want to think about the fact that if women were not trained only for marriage and they were earning as much as they needed and they fell in love with a man, do you think the first question they ask him is, what is your salary? I really don't think so. If they fall in love with someone, they fall in love with someone, and in fact they're fighting with their parents who are saying, iska kaam hi kya hai? Kya karta hai ye? Kuch karta to nahi hai. It's a parental pressure. And there will of course be women who want to marry rich men and whatever, but then there are so many men who are. So let's not go into individual men. I don't mean you. I don't know why everyone's laughing. I think because, I hope you're laughing because I swallowed a word. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, so I would say, I would actually say, it will become the norm. It will become the norm if the kind of things I'm saying change. If you start recognizing, you and everybody, that there should be no sexual division of labor in your home, for example. Your partner, your wife, your sister, your mother, do they do 75 to 80% of the housework? How much do you contribute? If you start with that, it would lead to a very different world. So I want to just say, because, it's actually I just want to conclude this by saying that the anxiety that you express suggests that feminism only empowers women. For example, I also hear this question sometimes, don't you think, does feminism need the support of men, right? And my question is, why do you think all feminists are in bodies assigned gender female at birth? I know hundreds of men who are oppressed by patriarchy. They're oppressed by patriarchy. They don't want to be Mardana. They don't want to be, as you say, the primary breadwinners. They want to study music. They want to study painting. No, the engineer banna hai tumko. Right? So, and on top of it, the pressure of providing, etc. So patriarchy oppresses men as well, but it doesn't oppress men the way it oppresses women, because men have a choice to escape patriarchy. Men can say, I will not be patriarchal from today. It's like a powerful person. It is easier for me to denounce my caste identity, which is hanging from my name, than if I were a Dalit. It is a fact. The powerful can say, I don't want this power, and try And even then, you're not giving it up. You think you're giving it up, but at least you're consciously aware of your privilege, right? So men are also oppressed. I won't say the caste system oppresses the Savarnas. I'm not saying that. Only about patriarchy, I'm saying that it doesn't. So when you step out of patriarchy, you actually enter into a world of mutual enriching relationships. Try it out.
On that note, I think given what the clock or the watch is telling us, we need to bring this program to an end. I know that many of you have many questions. Hold on to them so that maybe we can ask her to come back again and answer them. So we can have that. But I would like to end with one last observation from a senior teacher from our college, Dr. Kaveri Chatterjee of Department of English.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Menon. It was wonderful listening to you, except on the last moment, I have a little bit of difference of opinion. When you said the marital rape, you you would tell your friend to divorce him and carry on with her, otherwise she will lose the golden years of her life. I have a problem with that, because if that is the option, I'm going to give the person who's faced marital rape, that's the same excuse I will give the posh. That is the same excuse I will give, because it is very difficult to carry on with this kind of a case, any case, whether at the workplace, whether at, in the home, if there's sexual oppression, how do you explain? And then you tell the girl, don't protest, go somewhere else and carry on with your life. I don't think that is the advice I should give you.
I see your point. No, I see your point. I see your point. I'm conflicted about marital rape. I see your point.
Thank you so much. I think, and how do you thank Professor Menon? First, she spoke for more than an hour. Then she took questions for more than half an hour. So big round of applause to her, to her energy, and to her ideas. All such programs usually come to an end with an official vote of thanks. So I will request our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shamrat Bhattacharjee, to kindly come forward and do the...
Thank you, Srimoi. Let me begin by offering my sincere gratitude and token of appreciation to today's resource person, Professor Nivedita Menon. Can we have silence for a minute, please? I promise I won't take long. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for enriching us with your lecture, which I'm sure will inspire the students and researchers here to hone their thought process in the areas of feminism. Thank you once again for coming to Scottish Church College, and we would love to have you in future also. Thank you so much. I'm thankful to the guests. I'm thankful to the guests, faculty members, researchers, students from various colleges and universities for their gracious presence. My sincere thanks to our Secretary, Dr. Shapun Kumar Mukherjee, our Principal, Dr. Madhumanjari Mondol, Vice Principal, and all the internal management cell members for their valuable inputs to organize today's lecture. I am grateful to the faculty members of History, Philosophy, and Political Science departments for organizing the lecture and for collaborating with the internal quality assurance cell. I will be failing in my duty if I don't acknowledge the Women and Gender Development Cell and the coordinator, Dr. Ishita Shur, for putting in all her efforts to stage today's lecture. Thank you, Ishita. She was just telling me she started from 11th March and today is 19th April. Thank you, Ishita. You have done a wonderful job. I would thank Srimoi Guho Thakurta for conducting this entire lecture series so efficiently. Thank you, Srimoi. Finally, I would thank the faculty members from Scottish Church College, the students and the support staff for all their efforts. Please excuse me if I have missed out anyone. Thank you all once again. Do take care of yourselves and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, thank you to the IQAC coordinator for always being with us. We have come to the end of the program. We have some refreshment for you. I think you're armed with your food coupons, so you know that there is something.
But I will request all of you to stay seated and wait for the dignitaries to please exit. So till then, please stay calm. Is this it?
No, I just wanted to thank all of you for one of the most exhilarating sessions and conversations I've ever had. Thank you so much.